Hi, I'm Richard with the Data Success Team. Dataedo version 23.2 is now out, and with it comes some big changes in functionality and with the interface here, especially in Dataedo Desktop. So I want to take a few minutes and talk about these changes on the interface so that you'll be familiar with that before you start learning the new features. To do this, let's just work our way around the screen. At the top of the screen, of course, we have the menu and the context-sensitive ribbon. These haven't changed much. There will be some new icons that represent new functionality in the context-sensitive ribbon, but overall, you won't have any trouble using that. Below that, however, is a new line, and that is navigation type controls. The very first control over here on the left, that is a back button that allows you to move backward stepwise through the locations that you have been or the places you have visited within Dataedo Desktop in the current session. It doesn't do anything from prior sessions. So that allows you just to work stepwise back through where you've been. The next icon right there, the down arrow, this opens a menu or a list of, again, those places that you have visited. So using the back arrow would take you stepwise backwards through this list. I'm not going to say more about this list right now. I'm going to come back to it in a minute and explain how this works. The next item here is your address bar or breadcrumbs. This is like the address bar in Microsoft products that you're familiar with. And what this does is it tells you where you are in relation to the rest of the tree, or in this case, the repository explorer. So if I click on an object here, notice I now have that list of breadcrumbs that shows me where I'm at. If I go farther in here, let's go to the person table, for example, I now can see we're in the person table, which is a table in the AdventureWorks collection, which is a data source in the entire repository. It allows us to know where we are, and if needed, you could click on one of these and go back to that location. It allows you a little more flexibility with navigation. Another thing I'd like to talk about with regards to the breadcrumbs is that you can do your navigation there. Open up the person table to get more examples. If we click on any of these arrows in the breadcrumb bar, it will open a list of all of the objects that exist at the same level and in the same collection as what we're looking at. So here we are looking at the person table, and you can see the other tables that exist in that collection. If we move over to AdventureWorks, we can see all of the objects that exist, again, the same level as tables, so we could choose others. And as we go back, we see that continues. So technically, you could choose other objects and do all of your navigation right here. The drawback, of course, is if you don't know the structure, you can't browse easily into different data sources and different spaces of your data catalog. But you can do it here if there's a need to. Now let's move on over here to the left side. We have a sidebar menu now that we didn't have before. The first item in there is your home button. Clicking on this takes us back to the beginning, where we started when we signed in to Dataedo Desktop. The next item is a search button. This opens a search panel right there. And notice when I can click in here and I can type things, I can work with it. But when I leave, this will close automatically. This panel is very similar to the panel. In fact, it's identical to the panel that you get when you click on search in the ribbon. The difference is this one will be pinned open by default. So I click off, it remains open, and I can close it. If I use this one, it is unpinned by default, but again, I can pin it. So they're the same thing. It's just that initial behavior is what is different between those two. The next item on here is another history list. This one is history like you're familiar with in your internet browser. In other words, a list of the places you have visited. And if you click on one of these and visit that item then will move to the top of the list and become the most recent page that you have visited. So that is how that one works. Now I'm going to go back and show how this list up here works, because it is different. To illustrate this, I'm going to go over to Excel, and I'm going to talk about the undo and the redo functions that you're all familiar with. The shortcuts for those, of course, are the Control-Z for undo, Control-Y for redo. And you probably know those exist up here. There's the undo list right there. And so if you were going to use Control-Z, it would move you back one step at a time, just like that back button that I mentioned, and it would move you through these stepwise. But as you know, you can come down here and you can choose one and jump to that and bypass those other steps. So I'm going to go down here to the third one. Notice there are two more above it that happened after it in the sequence. So I click there. I've now gone back to where I inserted that column, and the two items that appeared after that now, all three of them in fact, are over here. The two are now below that because they occurred after. So we're now starting at a single point in time, and we can see everything that occurred after that in the redo list and before that in the undo list. Now, as you know, if I have a different action at this point, for example, if I were to type something here, then notice the redo list has gone away. I've erased that effectively because I'm now on a different pathway of actions. And the redo, the most recent one, is that last action that I took. So you have that ability to jump to the middle of the list, but that effectively erases everything else because you're on a different pathway. So that's what's happening here. If I open this list, I can see the list of all of the places that I visited in a stepwise fashion. I can jump to one of these, and I'm now at that position. In the list, it is bold, showing me that's where I am, and you can see below that all of the places I visited prior, and above it all of the places that I visited after that. If I do something different at this point, all of these locations above this in the list, sort of like that redo in Excel, those will disappear and we'll be on a different pathway of navigation. Notice that jumping backward in this list does not reset the actions that you took. So if you made edits to objects up in here, those will remain even if you jump backwards in the navigation. This is a navigation-based stepwise list, not a redo and undo, strictly speaking. The next item in the sidebar menu, right here, let me close this one to illustrate. The next item in the sidebar menu is the Repository Explorer that you're all familiar with. And again, this can be pinned open or you can let it close. So I will pin that open with the arrows right there. And this now locks that open so that you can navigate and search through it. Again, notice that this item is in bold, indicating that's where I'm at right now. This is the context that I'm looking at. If I want to change that, I double click. So I give it, for example, I double click on Wide World Importers database, and that takes me to that context or that collection. Notice also it did open another panel. Now, the difference between this navigation and the old navigation is that the Repository Explorer now goes as far as collections down here in the data sources, or we're going to talk about domains, but it takes you to data areas up here in the domain space. And then the other items that are inside of a collection, for example, the tables, the views, the procedures, you're used to seeing them right here in a hierarchy. They've just moved over here. And to work in here, of course, again, you double click to select things. If I want to choose a table, I double click on it. It opens in the content pane, and we work with that exactly the same way we always have done in the content pane. The difference here is that we now can make this space bigger by closing these two navigation panes, and we have a large content pane to work with. Works the same way. We can pick up tabs, and we can move them, and we can reorganize and do all of those things that we're used to doing, but we don't have to look at the navigation all the time. If I want to change to a new table, and if it's in the same collection, I can use that icon right there. Notice this is the Worldwide Importers collection. I can choose a different table, for example, double click, and it will open that table in the content pane. If I want to change to a different collection, I use the Repository Explorer, double click the new collection I want to go to. I've changed to AdventureWorks, and within that context now, I can choose a table, for example, addresses right there, and it will open, and I can close that navigation, give myself more space to work in the content pane. So the navigation is different, but you'll soon get used to it. The reason it's different, let me open these again. The reason this is different is it allows us to remove subject areas from collections. Remember, you used to have collections associated with, we used to have subject areas associated with those collections, and it could be confusing. We've removed those out. The subject areas now are part of domains. Business domains have these top level areas. Those are subject areas. So within business domains, we have subject areas, and within data domains, we have data areas like this. And when we open these, we'll see that we have items linked to those domains, just like we had items linked to the subject areas. And you can work with them the same way. But by having the navigation this way, you can group different kinds of items together in that domain and work with them all together. It gives you a more cohesive understanding of all of the objects or assets that pertain to that domain. And notice those are hierarchical. You can have multiple levels in your domain organization, or your, let's call it, data area organization here. And it gives you a lot of flexibility and a lot of capability of how to present this information to your users. We'll get into that more in the video about domain use exactly, but I just wanted to mention that's why we have two navigation panes now, is because of this idea of making things available in business domains and data domains. That covers the changes that I wanted to show you about navigation within Dataedo Desktop. As always, if you have problems or questions, feel free to reach out to the Data Success team at success@dataedo.com. Thank you for using Dataedo, but the takeaway from this video is double-click is your friend. If you get lost in the navigation and you can't see what you think you are supposed to be looking at, remember, double-click opens those objects so that you can see them.